Good morning and welcome to our meeting today, organized by the representatives of European Investment Bank for the Western Balkans in Serbia, in cooperation with the EU delegation to Belgrade. We will talk about the influence of the pandemics on the small and medium businesses in Serbia in the year 2021 and the perspectives for the next year, 2022. We have eminent panelists here from the European Investment Bank, experts from the relevant institutions, and we will try to find answers to some of the key topics which are presenting themselves as challenges because of the pandemics. We are all working and living in special circumstances almost 2 years now, and we will look at the consequences the pandemics had on the small and medium businesses, and we will try to see how the pandemics will affect the small and medium businesses next year. But before we start our debate, we will hear the video on the video link, introductory speech by the European Ambassador to Belgrade, Emmanuel Giuffre.
Dobar dan svima. I could not be with you physically to listen to your discussion, but I do find this topic of great importance as small and medium enterprises have the EU particular focus, and especially so during the pandemic. At the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, the European Union has deployed 93 million euro of emergency assistance, which apart from healthcare support, provided precisely financial help for small and medium enterprises to help them to get through the difficult times. Small and medium-sized companies are crucial for every economy. They are the backbone and healthy of sustainable economic growth. This is why, in the last 20 years, the European Union invested over 250 million euros into the development of this sector and its competitiveness. Only through our EU Pro program, for instance, we have supported over 200 SMEs, which created to date over 550 jobs, and this is just one of our programs. The focus of the ongoing EU support is multifold and includes innovation at the company level, commercialization of research and development, consent for technology transfer, improved business environment, and better access to finance. Thanks to the European Union support, Serbian companies can currently receive a tailor-made business advice at company level to get a more favorable credit from our partner banks, and this is why it is important that the EIB raises the discussion today, and hence expect a more transparent and optimized business environment. Additionally, you can join some of the 20 business incubators that has received the EU technical support. If a company has an innovative idea, it can get some of our many grants from the Innovation Fund. I'd like to stress that out of the large part of the IPA instrument within ongoing projects includes support to business related to improvement of the business environment, boosting innovation capacity of SMEs through the Innovation Fund, grants, developing the first systems of growth acceleration of SMEs in Serbia, purchasing new equipment for micro and small companies, and entrepreneurs. These activities will eventually increase Serbian enterprises' competitiveness, lead to the creation of new business or expansion of existing ones, develop new products, and prepare companies for the European Union and global market. The creation of new jobs will follow. This is of multifold importance as our economies grow stronger and bigger together. There is no better partner for Serbian business than the European Union, because we know that the stronger the Serbian economy is, the better it is for the European Union. We are counting on your dynamism and creativity to make the whole of Europe more prosperous and sustainable. The European Union is Serbia's most important trading partner, accounting more than 60% of total trade in 2020, and the EU is by far Serbia's biggest source of foreign direct investment, over 67% of total FDI to Serbia, reaching a total of 17.4 billion in the period 2010-2020. And trade and investment will continue growing as we move closer to the accession of Serbia to the European Union. So please hear our call and come and seize the opportunities that the European Union can offer.
Now I will ask Mr. Alexandro Bragonzi, head of the regional office of the European Investment Bank for the Western Balkans, to take the floor and give us his keynote speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this important discussion today on how to boost development of private sector in Serbia. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the small and medium enterprises has been massive. The EIB Enterprise Survey shows that as much as around 38% of companies in the Western Balkans had to close down their businesses during the pandemic. At the same time, the crisis also created the opportunity to change and become more resilient. And there are two paths set forward for the economy of the future. One is digitalization, and the other one is green transition. We hope that the additional 760 million that the EIB has invested since the start of the pandemic for the Western Balkan companies under the Team Europe initiative has helped many SMEs not only to sustain their liquidity and businesses, but also to start with this new transformation. To support these efforts, the EIB introduced new financing instruments for the region. The EIB Group has already signed new loans with commercial banks that will help firms introduce climate-friendly practices and improve their digital skills and capacities, which are essential elements of sustainable business models. We have implemented our innovative impact incentive loan for the first time ever for Serbian companies, aiming to encourage women entrepreneurship and permanent employment of socially vulnerable groups. However, financial support will not be all it takes to make local economies more competitive and resilient. That is why we are developing new partnership and initiative in Serbia and the region to upscale our technical support in delivering climate and energy efficiency projects for the SMEs together with the European Commission. Our aim is to provide top-notch advisory services intended to step up investments that will help in advance the green agenda for Serbia. Our expert will help the financial sector to identify eligible investments in the area of clean technologies and green circular businesses that have long-term positive impact on the preservation of environment and natural resources, as well as on reduction of pollution. The factor that will be decisive for the green transformation and sustainable growth of all sectors is innovation. As one of the leading financiers in this area, the EIB invested over 200 million to support R&D sector in Serbia today, which help create platforms for dynamic development of innovative science and technology entrepreneurship. Such is the case with the science and technology parks in Belgrade, Novi Sad, and Niš that are hosting a large number of startups. During over 40 years long operations in Serbia, the EIB unlocked over 2.5 billion for the private sector, which self-sustain over 330,000 jobs. Now, we want to scale up our support and work even more directly with SMEs to pass on our expertise and know-how in regard to climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as innovation. All those activities are expected to boost development of the private sector, innovation, and creation of new jobs.
Today, we will talk about the COVID-19 pandemics and how the pandemics influences or had influenced the small and medium enterprises this year and the perspectives for 2022. On my left, I have Mr. Simon Savšek, an expert from the economic unit of the European Investment Bank. Then, next to him, we have Nikola Altiparmakov, member of the Fiscal Council of Serbia. We have Mr. Marko Denon, head of the Competition Department in the National Alliance for Local Development, and Mr. Vladimir Radovanović from the Serbian Chamber of Commerce, their Center for the Support of Economy and Small and Medium Enterprises. As I have said, this is the second year we live in pandemic circumstances. Economy and businesses are operating in this setting. Businesses were fighting, trying to transform themselves as much as they could. We have a survey, a research by European Investment Bank, EBRD, and the World Bank, looking into the reactions and success of the application modifications. Following this survey, 1/3 of the businesses shut down during the pandemics and 2/3 of the businesses had cash flow problems. These are some of the results from this research. We will have a complete presentation of the research, but I will just remind you that a month ago we had an assembly of the European Entrepreneurship for 2021 organized once a year by the Union. This year it took place in Portorož in Croatia, and the survey which led to this assembly carried out by Euro Chambers, 52,000 businesses in 26 European countries were surveyed. And they signaled out as the biggest problem in doing business in 2021 was actually the disruption in supply chains, change of habits of the consumers and maintaining cash flow. So these problems are present everywhere, not only in the Western Balkans. Our first presenter will be Mr. Savšek, who will present the results of the research of the European Investment Bank, EBRD, and World Bank about the conditions for doing business in Western Balkan. Mr. Savšek, please.
Izvolite, gospodine Savšek.
Thank you. I am pleased to be here in Belgrade with you, but to be precise, I will speak in English.
So yes, before I start, I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting me here, Alessandro and his office in Belgrade. We have great cooperation also with the EU delegation here in the wider region, and I'm super happy to be back. Before I start with the pure economics, let me also just say that, in principle, this was a health crisis. So we economists really like to speak always about the GDP impact and about employment impacts, but there were lots of tragedies connected to this pandemic, and I think this is like the first thing that we need to say here. Now, in terms of GDP, I don't want to go very deep, but I would just like to say that at least us economists, we expected that this crisis is going to be even more severe. So basically, firms in Serbia weathered the crisis relatively well compared to what we thought. The GDP just basically shrank by 0.9% in 2020, and the recovery is quite strong. And in this sense, I think it was a bit better than we were initially feared. Now, indeed, as Ms. Nikolic said just now, we want to go deeper and understand much better what the companies think about the situation here. And that is why we basically started with getting more survey data from Serbian and also firms in Western Balkans. So this research is now slowly going out, and it's going to be published probably in the next few months. So I'm going to just give you the highlights of this research and not go really deep, because otherwise I would spoil it and nobody would then read the paper itself. So first thing that comes out of this is that the shock was very heterogeneous. So there were sectors that were very strongly hit: hotels, restaurants, the sectors that are working with social distancing. And on the other side, there were also sectors who did much better in terms of the pandemic. The second thing that comes out of this is that there was substantial policy support. Namely, here in Serbia, we saw monetary support that was big, fiscal support that was big, which preempted much worse outcomes. We saw very limited bankruptcies, even though, as you said before, and also Alessandro said initially, we had closures, but they were not permanent. So firms did quite well in generally, but there are obviously also some very, very big challenges ahead of it. And here what we found out is that firms that were more productive before the pandemic, firms that invested more in good managerial practices, firms that invest more in climate, all these kind of firms first did much better in terms of output losses, they did better in terms of sales. But what we also saw on top of it is that they invested even more in the digital, in the climate. So, it seems some kind of that this gap between the very good firms and the worst firms is going to become even bigger after the pandemic. And just to say, also as regarding financing, the conditions stayed relatively stable. We see some problems back in there, but I'm going to touch probably upon this a bit later on. And obviously, what we also found out is that apart from the fact that support was here, like a huge support, basically, we also saw that it was not very targeted. And I think this targeted support going forward, including from the EIB, is going to be crucial.
Thank you.
Nicola, we heard that we had a lot of support, but that the support was not best targeted. Fiscal Council of Serbia did have the same criticism. The way how the money was distributed in Serbia, the quantity of the support, financial support, was considerable, but not well distributed. Was the 2021 the year of recovery for the SMEs? The year of recovery for the entire economy? Yes, 2021. For SMEs, we think that because of the insufficiently precise targeting of the financial support is questionable. The surveys need to show us this. Maybe small, medium enterprises did not get enough or appropriate support. Us in the Fiscal Council supported the first reform package immediately when the health crisis broke out. We thought, all right, this is emergency, you don't have time to think in great detail, and we thought that the first package of help, non-targeted, all right, but second and third package, we think, should have been calibrated, targeted. Last summer, Finance Minister and the Director of the Chamber of Commerce were addressing the public on the national television, talking about the targeted supply, targeted packages of help packages, but they gave it up. We saw positive effects on economy, but with better targeting, we could have had a cheaper support, less budget spending, 0% of the GDP, 500 million euros. I mean, all this sort of targeted help to the population, 100 euros, 30 euros, 20 euros. Yeah, they're going to continue with that next year. Yes, they will. And as we could see this year, this general targeting of the population will end this year, and we think it's very important to stop these measures. We were pointing out the results. We think that it's this international study of the IOM saying that the International Work Organization said that it reduced the poverty. It was not good. I mean, their analysis was not good. The positive effects were 3.5 times less than what they claimed. This is not the way to do social politics. We always knew this is not the way to do economic politics. So this sort of lump help to every single individual, it doesn't work. I hope they will not do it. Yes, thank you. Besides all the support provided by the Republic of Serbia, there were the funds credits from the European Investment Bank. There were some European Union grants. So let us see how some Serbian companies used these funds.
Ja sam koosnivač I direktor kompanije Just Smart. Naša delatnost je zapravo EdTech, to jest edukativne tehnologije. Pre nekih 6 godina, kada još uvek niko nije razmišljao o tome da će deca jednog dana učiti online, mi smo zapravo pokrenuli tu jednu web platformu, tu jednu ideju da lekcije za osnovnu školu mogu biti u digitalnom formatu, mogu biti na webu, dostupne svoj deci, putem računara, smart uređaja ili nekim drugim tabletima, mobilnim telefonima, sve zavisi kako ko pristupa, I da one mogu da budu interaktivne, da one mogu biti gamifikovane I da zapravo mi ponudimo deci 21. vek, tehnologiju, ali za ono što zapravo njima treba, a treba im znanje za školu. I taj koncept I ta ideja zaživela je, da kažem, eto, zahvaljujući ljudima koji su prepoznali da mi imamo ambiciju, da mi imamo želju I naravno da imamo i znanja i volju. I danas smo kompanija koja jako fino posluje i jako lepo radimo i naše tržište se širi, pa više to nije samo jedan brend, sad ih imamo dva, širimo se na tržište Severne Makedonije i zaista je lepo pratiti tu nit od onoga kada počnete do onog dana kada ponovo sednete ovako da razgovarate o tome gde ste bili, a dokle ste stigli. Mi smo korisnici fonda za inovacionu delatnost bili 2019-2020. godine. Dobili smo mini grant i to je nama puno značilo. Mi smo se u trenutku kada smo mi već dokazali naš biznis model i prijavili za ta sredstva i bila su nam jako značajna u smislu skaliranja, to je povećanja našeg uopšte tržišta, dokle možemo stići, šta možemo uraditi, ali su bila jako, jako značajna i za te neke izmene koje smo mi već znali da treba da napravimo, to jest videli kroz testove po ponašanju naših korisnika, kako zapravo mi taj naš proizvod možemo da unapredimo. Moram da kažem da sam proces dobijanja novca kod inovacionog fonda je značajan jer vas natera kroz pisanje tog projekta da se i vi preispitate, da i vi razmislite koliko zapravo ta vaša ideja ima smisla, koliko ona u samom tržištu može biti funkcionalna. I onda kada vi to dobro promislite, neke stvari i unapredite, čak i u vašoj ideji, u toj vašoj projektnoj dokumentaciji, ali kada dođete u izradu, sama ta podrška ljudi koji su u fondu u tom trenutku radili i verujem i dan danas, ta struka, to što vi naučite, danas je za nas neprocenjivo, tako da mnogo znači za samopouzdanje, za znanje i znači za budućnost svakako. Svako ko predaje mora zaista da veruje u svoju ideju. Mislim da je to mnogo važno. Mislim da je bitno da probate na milion načina, milion puta, ali da je nekako mnogo bitno da ne odustanete kada vam ljudi kažu pa to možda neće uspeti. Drugo, fond je zaista i to kroz što smo mi prošli, to je zaista nešto što ne podrazumeva nikakve veze, nikakve preporuke, već zapravo ono što vi jeste, ono što ste vi uradili, ono što vi znate i to je neko mesto gde zaista demokratija postoji.
Pa prvi put smo aplicirali 2011. godine, tada smo radili preko IBRD-a. Drugi put smo radili sa Evropskom investicionom bankom 2016. godine, kada smo dobili oko 3,5 miliona eura, izvinjavam se, 3,5 miliona eura. Tada smo 1 milion eura dobili preko Evropske investicione banke i treći put, isto nam je tada jako puno značilo, smo ušli u proizvodnju čokolada i treći put smo investirali za vreme pandemije, to je 2020. godine u aprilu, 2 miliona i 300 hiljada eura i tada smo, isto nam je jako puno značilo, smo doneli odluku da uradimo investiciju iz prostog razloga što smo očekivali veliki pad za vreme pandemije. Ušli smo u nove proizvode, ušli smo u čokolade sa 5 slojeva i ušli smo u licencu za Sunđer Bob. Neli je zadnjih 15 godina u kreditima i ja mogu samo se zahvalim Evropskoj investicionoj banci i privatnim bankama koje postoje, jer da nije njih mi ne bi mogli da investiramo. Šta je to donelo Neliju? Donelo je 300 novih radnih mjesta. Šta je donelo? Donelo je 120 novih proizvoda. Donelo je izvoz u Rusku federaciju, donelo je izvoz u bivšu Jugoslaviju, donelo je izvoz u zemlje Evropske unije. Mi smo postali jedna ozbiljna fabrika koja je danas jedna od najsavremenijih u Evropi, jer sa ovom investicijom zadnjom mi smo uradili bukvalno automatizaciju svega, robotizovali fabriku i postali smo pakeraj smo smanjili na minimum što se tiče broja ljudi i postali smo jedna od najsavremenijih fabrika u Evropi. Prvo, morate da verujete u ono što radite. Morate imati ogromno samopouzdanje. I ako krenete u to, nema nazad. Drugo što je bitno, to je da imate dobre ljude sa kojima sarađujete, da se bazirate na dobre dobavljače, da radite sa sigurnim kupcima, jer bez prodaje i bez plasmana ne vredi nijedna investicija. Znači, prodaja je ključ uspeha I na kraju morate strogo voditi računa o finansijama. Ne smijete da trošite više nego što zarađujete.
Mr. Radovanović, the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia also did its survey and was monitoring different forms of assistance over the past 2 years. So now, after the 2 years of the pandemic, which industries and sectors were most hardly struck? We, as the association of all Serbian companies, the chamber, we conduct surveys of the economy on a weekly and quarterly basis. And in this context, we have relevant data that we collect from the market, from the companies in Serbia. Most hardly affected were the sectors of hospitality, tourism, hotels primarily, also event management sector, and road transport. We should also note that the tourism sector is recovering in 2021, but for full recovery, it is necessary to reach the levels before the pandemic and have the COVID behind us for the sector to recover fully. On the other hand, we should also note that among the industries which are leading in the recovery, we should note the construction sector certainly and the ICT industry, the services industry, which not only maintained its profits and jobs, but also increased these levels during 2021. Equally important is to know that the deficit that we now have in trade is made up for with the sufficit in the form of services delivery, software applications. So this whole sector of ICT and e-business and distant working are the winners in the pandemic. But to go back to targeting assistance, were the funds well targeted to these industries? As we've just heard, one of the key elements that were problematic for small and medium enterprises were liquidity. According to the data that we have in the pandemic year, about 70% of SMEs had lower revenues than pre-pandemic. Automatically, favorable loans that were available in 2021 greatly assisted micro and small enterprises to recover. We've heard also that we did not have major bankruptcies, meaning that the activities and measures provided by the government and the chamber did have a positive impact on this. I'd also like to mention that micro and small enterprises did maintain the jobs, and generally speaking, they maintained their activities. So this 1/3, which had a temporary or lasting closure, can they be revitalized and go back into activity? Certainly, yes. Mr. Danon, NALED, from its point of view, as an alliance assisting not only local government, but creating overall more enticing business environment through different legal and other policies. Probably NALED also has information from the ground that tax rates, labor force, political instability, all of these impact and lead to poorer economic activity which coincided with the pandemic over the past 2 years, and surveys, for instance, by the EBRD, European Investment Bank, and the World Bank indicate this. So how can these obstacles be overcome? Thank you, Ms. Nikolic, for the invitation to participate in this panel. Initially, we need to go back to the pandemic and how it evolved. Initially, it was a huge shock for the activity of enterprises, and as Mr. Sashek said, I remember those moments. As an economist, I was expecting and fearful that there would be stronger recession after March and April. Nevertheless, this did not happen at that level. The recession in our case was relatively mild, looking at the average decrease of economic activity and looking at the overall chains of supply, agriculture, and so on. So maybe this was a factor in the mild recession. At the very beginning of the state of emergency, along with the chamber, we discussed all of these issues with our members, and our members also presented some of their insights about what was the gravest factor during the pandemic. So initially, there were problems with reduced liquidity, breaks in the supply chain, organization of economic activity. So initially, quite a severe problem, but later on, thanks among other things to the support measures, this was more moderate, these negative impacts. Now, in 2021, we are seeing quite a strong recovery, as we've heard, and after about 1% drop in GDP, now we are seeing this rate increasing. So we've exceeded the level of 2019. You said that there are certain findings about political instability, labor force, tax rates. And if these were obstacles before the pandemic, what happened during the pandemic? Did these obstacles increase? Many companies are telling us that for some of the economy, tax rates are an important factor, but there is also another challenge, which is the administrative burden for the economic entities. And in this respect, we were quite active in listening to the companies, listening to the economy, and passing on these messages and our insights into certain recommendations and solutions. So, for instance, we were successful in contributing to the issue of lump sum taxation, and in this respect, the administrative burden was quite reduced for beginner entrepreneurships. But with respect to, as you said, reducing the tax burden currently, I'd like to note in this context the set of laws that the Ministry of Finance tabled to the Parliament, and the Parliament adopted e-fiscalization, e-invoicing, and in the context of tax policies, it is important that we now know that these two laws will be coming into effect already as of May next year. Why is this important? Because on the one hand, these laws, in our opinion, could result in a more transparent operation of the tax administration, more transparent oversight of transactions among different actors. The law will be introduced by stages, but this will also contribute to overall digitalization of the economy and better budget revenues, and finally also to building capacities of the economy. These changes are irrespective of the topic that we are discussing today, focused on the pandemic, but it is very good that we are seeing progress in this respect. It is always a matter of speed as well as to how fast these things are happening to make things more efficient. But to go back to the survey, Mr. Sashek, the EIB is also taking part in financing the economy, and during the pandemic, this has continued. So from this point of view, and your surveys of the Western Balkans, the region, what support is needed for the Serbian companies to become more resilient to the crisis?
So indeed, this is a very interesting question, what the firm should do, and also a very difficult one, So if you look at generally from our findings that I said, it's more for the wider region. Again, they would need to invest much more into being integrated in the global value chains to increase this resilience. They will need to increase their investments into climate. For example, if you just look at it a bit broader, SMEs in Serbia practically are not monitoring their CO2 emissions, other pollutants. So these are all things that are becoming more and more important with the climate change. Then on the digital front, also here the EIB is obviously providing support, but infrastructure is going to need to be done together with them, basically, because ourselves we are just not having enough of assets to bring these big gaps that are here in Serbia and also in the wider region. Then I think the most important one is to educate their own workforce. If you look at what basically firms told us here in Serbia, you would see that only 40%, a bit above 40% of them are investing in their own staff with internal trainings. And all these kind of things are going to increase the productivity and bring basically the needed space for productivity to be fostered further.
Yes, we need investment in skills, in climate changes, in different accommodations, but let us see how the state is apportioning fiscal stimuli for 2021. Is the state actually going to provide some fiscal support, Mr. Altiparmakov? In 2021, we think that fiscal support was sufficient in principle. We think one could have achieved the same effect with less money if it were better targeted. Unlike the first package for the SMEs, in the second and third package was covering the big companies, which we think was not efficient in terms of budget spending. As far as stimuli for this year, support for this year, yes, we think it was enough to help the economy. Next year, 2021, there are no projected new anti-COVID measures, no new tax support stimuli. We think this is justifiable. If we have the economic growth of some 7% in the economy, as we had this year, there are no economic reasons, economic justifications why the state would boost any domain of the economy. We hear some voices, for instance, here about the hotels, like the hotels in the cities are hardly hit, but we think it is not justifiable to use the budgetary funds in this way because the same thing is happening in Europe. City hotels are hit, they are adjusting proactively. Some hotels are transforming in some kinds of organized renting of living space long-term. So this is a transformation of the economy. The economy will not be the same after the pandemic, that's definite. And we think it would be counterproductive economically to provide stimulations to certain sectors in economy who are more hit. What is hit is the permanent change of the economic structures. We are living in capitalism. People have to adjust. SMEs are always the most vulnerable. Of course, us in the Fiscal Council cannot judge, of course, how able they are to continue with their businesses as usual. But as we speak now, we think maybe it's not good that we do not hear the representatives, the specialized organizations of the SMEs. NALED, Chamber of Commerce of Serbia, are doing good job, quality job, what they do, but not a single organization which, it seems to me, is influencing the policy making, is not specializing or representative in terms of SMEs. We think it would be good to hear the voice of the SMEs and then see how to help them best. Yes, there were attempts to create an association or something of the kind for the SMEs, which would be more representatives, but we see that this did not happen till now. It's happening through other institutions. Mr. Radovanović, how important the financial instruments like the credits, the loans of European Investment Bank are? These instruments are helping the SMEs to become more competitive on the market. You have programs for that. Chamber of Commerce is also informing, directing SMEs to look for this. Of course, definitely, I would first of all stress the mechanism of guarantees which function in 2021 and 2020. The government, in cooperation with commercial banks, agreed the conditions for privileged loans, for privileged crediting. The government took on itself part of the risk as a guarantor to boost the liquidity on the market. Us in the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia, together with the cooperation of the government, we are implementing a similar mechanism targeting specifically the start-ups, promoting entrepreneurship and self-employment. Similar mechanism, the government is actually acting as a 60% guarantor, collateral for every beginner, for every startup, which reduces the banking risk and makes it easier, of course, makes it easier for the beginner to get the loan. So no mortgages, no other collaterals to secure the loan, which is usually the case. The government is there to back it up, so it reduces the risk. On the other hand side, from our point of view, it is important to attract other international financial organizations which would credit the economy. It would help not only SMEs, it would help the beginners, and that would provide more funds on the financial markets here in Serbia available for SMEs and startups. I would agree 100% with my colleagues, but stressing from the point of view of economy, I have to say it is important to carry on with these programs of stimulative financial support under privileged circumstances. It is a budgetary burden, considerable budgetary burden, but it is very important for the economy in order to keep the cash flow of SMEs. Of course, the support is precious when it comes from the other side. But then we will have a look what the council, taxation council, we have nothing against targeted support. Our main criticism was that a lot of money went just like that, untargeted. Yes, this is the special problem, and we have the lobbying influencing the flow of the financial support. I found it interesting in the survey of the EIB, survey done here with European Investment Bank and its partners. 2/3 of the companies surveyed in the Western Balkans do not see energy efficiency as measures of they should implement as their priority. We saw how important climate changes are, new ways of doing business, accommodating the changes necessary for the climate because of the climate influence. So I would ask you, Mr. Danon, how to change the way people look at energy efficiency. What financial support would be needed in the region? We cannot talk about just, your knowledge. We have some kind of loans of support for energy efficiency, and yet the SMEs are not prioritizing, they're not focusing on energy efficiency. What your comments? Yes, indeed, I have to stress first that if we look at energy efficiency, we didn't have lot of analysis to clarify the scope of this problem and what we could have as solutions. But what I can notice as an economist and what our team actually looks at often, our economy is inefficient in energy terms, in resource terms. We are amongst the most inefficient economies in Europe, looking at how much materials or energy is used up to generate 1 unit of GDP. So this can be improved considerably. The environment is important and is getting more and more important. So there is lots of scope, lots of opportunity to make our growth more green and even more green. We want growth, but the growth necessarily implies, considering that our economy is very resource intensive, that our growth is resource intensive, so things need doing there. What can be done? A lot. Fiscal Council, Mr. Parmakov can say more than me. You did some assessments how much we need in terms of investment, sort of short mid-term, in order to go to more renewable energy and so on. So these are huge investments necessary, billions of euros we are talking here. But what can be an incentive there? You asked how important, for instance, how important are the funds given by international finance institutions to our companies, or which are coming through the banking sector into our economy. So we think there is a lot of scope there. The ESG, environmental, social, governance criteria, should be involved as criteria for the support programs. Mr. Savchak could say more. But in terms of recommendations, these are the recommendations that would help. And also, on the general political level, what we see, we have the cluster, opening of the cluster in our key, in the EU negotiations, sort of the environment cluster is going to be open, so that could help a bit to help the boost in energy efficiency in comparison to other countries. Yeah, that's Serbian particularity. The cluster will be open, but the entire region of the Balkans does not see energy inefficiency as a problem, does not see it clearly enough.
Let me just say here, maybe also to complement this, that what we are also seeing for the EU, it's very interesting. If you ask people about the long-term priority, everyone will tell you climate is a the most important thing. You tell them what you are doing or what do you think about now, it's not such a big deal. And this is obviously a problem for the policy to address. And it's not only that Serbia has a huge gaps, it's also other countries in the region. We are all facing this climate change as a big deal. And obviously I think that telling that this is really important for the private sector is going to be crucial, because MDBs and all other institutions just don't have the funds to really go into it. So it's going to be more important going forward. I would just like to complement this here.
Thank you. Yes, that's what I had in mind. This is an important topic which is not sufficiently present, which is surprising. What's surprising for me as a result of the survey? Of course, the funds are behind all of this, money is behind all of this. Huge sums are quoted, huge sums from the state budgets went into recovery and support. You, as an expert, you worked in the Central European Bank and Slovenian National Bank also. So you have experience with monetary policy. We see that inflation is challenge number one as the consequence of the pandemics in 2021, especially in the second half of 2021. So I would like to know, do you see any connection between the money which was emitted, sent as support, and during the pandemics, and inflation that followed up, considering that SMEs and citizens were equally hit?
Well, Ms. Nikolic, I for inflation forecasting and interest rates, I have to say that I had a crystal ball coming from Luxembourg to tell you a bit more about it, but unfortunately, because of the weather, it stayed in Luxembourg. And it's a very difficult question, and I don't think the answer is so straightforward, unfortunately. It is obvious that, first of all, I have to say that if we would not have full power from fiscal policy and from the monetary policy initially, I think we might have not been here. So now if this contributed to the developments of higher inflation, I think the answer to this is yes. Partly it is true that it's coming from the problems in the supply chains. Partly it's coming from the base effects from the energy side. But it's also true that this is now here with us some time. And I think that the answer to the question is that probably as long as we have the virus here, we might see a bit higher levels of inflation and still quite strong policy stimulus here. Now, we also saw that some central banks in the region are already increasing interest rates, So it's a very difficult question, and I think that Narodna Banka Serbia would probably be in a better position for Serbia to say something about it. But it is obvious that the answer is much more complicated, and unfortunately, we will not be able to address it today fully.
Yes, indeed, it is a very complex question. And it will be resolved in different ways, how we are going to leave all of this, get out of all of this. But we are all in the same boat, basically. Inflation exists globally and locally.
I mean, obviously the main problem is it going to be if it starts feeding into the wages. So if you have more wage increases that are demanded, then obviously this might be a much more permanent impact. So I would say that an agreement still is that it's temporary, but I think that more and more there is a realization that it might stay with us a bit longer than before. Not saying only that Janet Yellen, the US Treasury, said something similar. So I would stay among that lines probably.
Yes, I saw this report from the States. Mr. Parmakov, we just mentioned Fiscal Council, inflation, budgetary deficit, public debt. This is all coming up as problems this year, probably even more in the years to come. What are your assessments? How this is going to be resolved? How this will affect economic development? Do we need another crystal ball for this, or do you have any ideas if we can have some assessment from you? In terms of what will happen precisely, of course you need a crystal ball, but we are going to have some turbulences. We can see this coming on the horizon. If we look at economic history, if you look at some other indicators, for instance, this summer, Greece, with a public debt, went up to 200% of their BDP, and they took the loan with negative interest rates. They were paying 20-30% rate when they had much less debt. So rational economic theories cannot explain this. We are witnessing huge disturbance on the market, which is caused by so much printing of money by European Central Bank and Federal Reserves in the States. We cannot print so much money indefinitely. So that was the message from the Fiscal Council, to bring the budget in calmer waters, reduce the deficit, and get ready for another global economic disbalance, global economic instability. When the inflation speeds up, sooner or later we will have to increase the interest rate. We are talking America and the States. When this starts happening in the EU and the States, we will have to be paying more for the money. We are in a good situation. Our public debt will be 58% of our GDP end of the year, considering that the budget is implemented next year without some extraordinary spending. Our public debt will be 56% of GDP, which can give us certainty. If we targeted our measures better, we could have been even lower than 56% of public debt. But this provides kind of a security umbrella for our country when interest rates start going up, which will happen definitely. We are not going to end up in a cul-de-sac, in a dangerous situation as we were in 2013, 2014. We are on good way, but we have to stand fast to and keep our deficit low as the government wanted to. Mr. Radovanović, we were talking about this favorable conditions for the development of digital technologies and IT sector, but we had some changes on the labor market as well. What assistance the companies need? Do they need assistance in the sector you're covering? Yes. What you said, SMEs and the need to go digital, this is very important, and it's very important for our economy. According to our surveys communicating with business sector, the pandemic itself, it might sound strange, the pandemics help digitalization. We were locked up at home and we had to go online, of course. And ideal for digitalization, yeah. And by default, a lot of SMEs, in order to reach their consumers, had to go to online trading, online retail. And we had measures that supported the work from home. So we need some software solutions, software tools which could help following the productivity of their employees. So this whole situation provided a possibility to startups and IT companies to be productive, innovative, and offer new solutions on the market to meet the needs of the SMEs and big systems alike. But what we need, specifically what we are missing, especially for the startups, are the so-called pre-seed financing, the financing of the early phases of their business. When you are a startup, when you're a beginner in business, they are treated as venture capital, as risk capital, be it public or private or alternative support. And for this very reason, until recently, they had very reduced access to financing for the early phases of startups. Especially, I mean, if you're a beginner, you do not have a business record, so it's difficult for you to get to get anything on the financial market. Our colleagues from NALED, their initiative to introduce tax facilities for the beginners, for the startups, and more, not only public programs, but also public-private programs for the support of startups in the earliest phase of their work are happening, which is encouraging. Also, we are looking at the implementation of the strategy of the startup ecosystem, which will definitely speed up the development of our startups. In the goal of this strategy is in this period ahead of us to move up the ladder and be a development startup environment with more startups. And what goes in favor of this entire situation with development of our startup ecosystem is the second report of Startup Genome and Financial Times writing, Economist writing, which are still classifying us as the leading startup scene in the region. Of course, this is linked with the labor market. Some important changes took place there. And I would ask you, Mr. Savchuk, considering that you have expert experience from the labor market, what is actually taking place, happening during pandemics? What's happening? We have IT technologies on one hand side. There is, the market wants more IT experts. Demand is for IT experts. And on the other hand, we have the shortage of manual labor, from civil engineering to delivery. All these services, as I said, delivery, online ordering needs to be delivered. What is the labor market looking like now?
So yes, indeed, another very, very interesting question. And I mean, I would say that we are facing, first of all, pandemic didn't complicate labor market conditions again as we thought, and I'm repeating that all the time. Even if you look at the unemployment rate in Serbia, it even declined. However, these persistent labor market challenges that are here with us for a very long time stayed, and that is the main problem. So first, on the macro level, I would say that the main problems are inclusion of women and young to the labor market, and it has to do a lot with the education sector. So this is one of the challenges. And on the other side, I think these are the new challenges which you just spoke about the automation in artificial intelligence on one side, which is going to make skills crucial. And I agree here with you when you said that there is a very dynamic ICT sector in Serbia, and this is obviously something that will need to be addressed, and the skills in this sector are going to be super, super important for further prosperity. And on the other side, we are getting probably into the direction that this manual work is going to get slowly, is going to be also in a sense needed, but it's going to be probably much lower paid. And here again, the policy of the government together with the companies is going to be crucial to address this very important, probably one of the most important challenges that we are going to face in the future.
Thank you. You managed the challenges. So to round up this all, let's bring this towards a closure. What are going to be the future challenges in 2022 for SMEs especially, and what kind of assistance they will need? Mr. Altipamakov. From the point of view of Fiscal Council, the main challenge will be for the government and society to stick to the budgetary planning, to reduce budgetary deficit, to reduce public debt, so that we could better prepare the new crisis, which is definitely going to come, so that we can face the crisis with as little public debt as possible, so that the government can react to the future crisis. SMEs what we generally follow, what we monitor, what we saw in research, SMEs, for them, legal environment, rule of law, business legal environment is very important for them. Unlike big companies or foreign investors who have some kind of leverage, business associations or other, they have much more leverage to solve their administrative problems. SMEs have no such leverage, so they depend on the rule of law and proper legal business environment where they can have certainty of the conditions for doing business. Mr. Down, same question. NALED is stressing also similar needs, business environment, legal safety. Yes, of course, I agree with Mr. Antipamakov. Definitely the rule of law is key, and I wouldn't make any difference between SMEs and other companies, even ordinary citizens. Rule of law is necessary for long-term business development, economic growth. Development in general. What you asked, what kind of 2022 are we going to see? Let's look element by element. Macroeconomic, Nicola said a lot. It seems to me that macroeconomically the biggest challenge are coming from outside. Of course, it is up to us, as Nicola said, to look at the sustainability of public debt, also to look at the average cost of our debts, you know, what we pay for the debt, and also what is maybe not in our hands as a society, a state. We cannot know what's going to come as imponderable, as unforeseen on the international markets. Inflation, we are talking now about it all. Inflation is coming from our exterior, but also the interrupted supply chains. It's affecting us all. Shortage of semiconductors and so on. So there are many pockets that can cause instability. And what affects us, and connected to what we heard from our colleague from the Chamber of Commerce, our economy this year, 2021, this phase of the pandemics, we are leaving the pandemics behind more resilient, certainly. Growth is here, but to keep this resilience in the years ahead, definitely we need rule of law, foreseeable macroeconomic environment, digitalization, AI, important element. Our economy is recognized as an economy which is prone to go IT, but the state has to follow it. Invoices, electronic invoices, electronic taxation, it's a massive step. In this respect, we see that the state is keeping up the pace with the others. So that's what we have as procedural economic factors, but politically, that was another question. In some respect, this is important for home economy, the dynamics of EU integrations, of course, and integrations in the region. And I would also like to add, to complement what you say, Mr. Savchik, about the labor market. I think we must not omit that in spite of having good situation on the labor market, the grey economy, the degree of informal employment is very high. According to our state statistic, 500,000 people is working in the grey economy, which is very high percentage. And you correct me, I stand to be corrected if I'm mistaken, but this part of the labor market is generating one of the biggest contributions to the grey economy, and this will continue, and it will be a important thing in the years ahead of us. We have to fight against it. And of course, I would like to add also that NALED is participating with a lot of state institutions in creating a comprehensive program, documents of public policies to fight against this grey economy, national program for the fight against grey economy with fiscal council. We all work together. Yes, you started with that, and then the pandemic happened. Your program was defined just before the pandemics.
Program vaš borbe za suzbijanje sive ekonomije.
Maybe if I can just say, I completely agree that this is the big issue. It's actually number one obstacle to doing business in Serbia. If you look at only at the country level, I think that 50% or even a bit more of firms are saying that they are facing competition from the informal sector. If you look at SMEs, and this is I completely agree and confirm that indeed.
In many sectors, grey economy is a challenge. So, Mr. Radovanović, what does the Chamber see as the main challenges for 2022? Inflation, stress and pressure certainly will have impact generally on international capital market interest rates, which will then be reflected in the business of our companies. Secondly, inflation itself, which is at its historical maximum both in Europe and in the US, is already influencing prices of energy, prices of raw materials, implying greater production costs, greater transport costs, which will all have consequences on the economy. So there could also be a worsening of the pandemic to stop economic growth and increase unemployment. So these are all potential factors for 2022. But to go back to the economy, we need access to finance, primarily maintaining liquidity of SMEs. Certainly, along with that, the already mentioned their involvement in the international value chains and supply chains. If we have somewhere about 120,000 companies registered, only 16,000 are predominantly export-oriented. So the majority is focused on the national market, which implies greater need to be integrated into major supply chains, which are key for export. Mr. Savchuk, what do you say about challenges? What will be the major challenges for SMEs in the next year?
I think, again, I would like to say that I completely agree at the macro level. I think that we all here agree that probably inflation, stabilizing public debt dynamics are the most important. Then I would just say that on the banks, we haven't touched much, but we see NPLs as being at the record low levels practically, and we don't know what is going to happen. So there is high uncertainty there, which we didn't touch, but it's important. Now for the small and medium sized enterprises, I would just like to repeat what we said, and I'm not going to go into further details, but investment in green digital education, being more integrated to the global value chains is for sure going to help them, and I think that we MDB stand ready here to support it, but obviously together with the government and others, all together we must act on this, otherwise I think we might miss this opportunity.
Certainly 2022 will bring us many challenges in the sector of the economy, particularly SMEs. Some may become unicorns, some may become digitally more developed, more advanced, some will not be able to survive lack of liquidity. But along with all of these, let me remind you of the conclusions of the assembly of entrepreneurship in Portorož from 15th to 17th November, when the key challenges identified for the next year were breaks in the supply chain, lack of liquidity, and change in consumer habits. These obviously are some key factors affecting SMEs, and they will continue to be so in the coming year. The most important in all of this is, of course, for the pandemic to be over, after which we will start thinking of other opportunities for